Okay, this is a new video looking at exercise 1 at the end of chapter 7 for our homework for the application exercises. This question or this exercise says write a sub that requests a positive integer with an input box. Then use a for loop to sum all of the odd integers up to the input number and display the result in a message box. So I've got a Excel file here. I'm going to right click in the white space. I'm going to insert a module into my VBA, and I'm going to create a sub. Let's go ahead and do chapter 7 exercise 1 sub with my 2 parentheses, add some spaces and some indentations. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new variable. Let's call it input num. I'm going to say let's do an integer for that one. And then I'm going to come down here and I'm just going to type in an input box. I'm going to create an input box and ask the user to input any whole number greater than 0. And let's do a VB OK cancel button. So there's a VB OK cancel button on our input. Let's just see what that looks like. I'll click F8, F8, and there's our input box. Input any whole number greater than 0. Let's do 101. And that's it. That's all we have. So we have an input box. That's good. We can start there. Now we're going to do a for loop. And for the for loop, I'm going to follow kind of the examples from the chapter. If we go back to page 130, there's an example about a for loop that uses the I variable. For I equals to 1. We're going to start at 1 because that's the first odd number. And we're going to count to the input number. So that's going to be our 2. And our step is going to be 2. So that means we're going to go up every odd number. We're going to go up 2. We're going to skip the evens. And then we're going to create a loop. So we're going to do a next as the ending language for our for loop. And everything inside is going to repeat until we hit that input box. Now there's a couple things we need to do here. We're going to come up here and we're going to create I as an integer. We need to define our counter. I is our counter for our loop. And then we also need to define a sum. And I'll go ahead and find that as an integer as well. That's what we're going to use inside of this for loop. And I'm just going to use a sum equals. I'm going to use sum again. I'm going to use the sum as part of the sum formula. And I'm going to add I to that formula. So what's going to happen here is for the first time around, let's say I put 101 is my input number. It's going to begin this loop, and the first one is I is going to be 1. And it's going to come down here, and the sum is going to be 0. We need to actually initiate our sum equals 0 here. The book talks about how it's a good idea to initialize it as 0. So the first time it runs, this sum is going to be 0, and this I is going to be 1. So that's going to be the sum. Next, I is going to be 3 because the step is 2. So it's going to step to 3. It's going to go 1 to 3. And it's less than input num, so it's going to execute. And this is going to be equal to 1 plus 3 because I is going to be 3, sum is going to be 1, and that sum is going to be 4. So let's just add a watch here. I'm going to right click on the word. It's going to add it into our watch window here. And let's add a watch for I. I'm going to right click on I, click OK for a watch on the sum and I. And I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to click F8. And I'm going to type in 101 just to get us going here. And I'm going to click F8 and there we go. So I is 1 and sum is 1 at this point. It's going to go to the next. And now I is 3. And when I hit F8 again, it's going to add 1 plus 3. And sum is going to be 4. So this is going to keep going. I tells us on which number it's on. Notice that I is all odd, right? It's skipping all the even numbers, and the sum is just adding the number to sum. So I'm going to go ahead and click F5, and that'll take us to the end of the program. And we won't know if it works or not because we still need a message box. So we'll come down here. We'll do message box, the sum of odd numbers up to, and I'm going to do an ampersand space, our input number, which is the input that we asked the user for. Another ampersand is space, quote, space, ampersand space, the sum, which comes from our loop. And then I'll add a period at the end, and that will be the text of the message box. So let's try this. If I hit F5, let's type 101, and we should see after I click OK a message box that sums all of the odd integers between 1 and 101. The answer is 2601. Okay, let's go ahead and move to another example here. This is exercise 6 at the end of chapter 7. This is asking about an input box. An input box statement returns a string, whatever the user enters in the box. However, it returns a blank string if the user enters nothing and clicks the OK or cancel button or the X button. Write a sub that uses an input box to ask the user for a product code. Embed this in a do loop so the user has to keep trying until the result is not a blank string. Okay, so this is going to help us to practice our do loops. We're going to create a sub. I'll call this chapter 7 EX6. Oops, missed my second parentheses. And I'm going to indent. And let's go ahead and create a statement variable. This will be the input that we will ask the user to type in. In fact, let's go ahead and call that a product, right? Product code as string. And let's do a do loop. There's a couple different do loops we could use. If we go back to page 139 in the book, here's our do loop section. There's a do until loop, which means it's not going to run the do loop. Well, it means the condition is at the beginning. So this means that the do loop may not run at all. This is do while condition is true or false. This is do something while there's a condition. So this at least says that it will do the do loop at least once, right? So there's 4 variations to this do loop. In this situation, let's go ahead and do the third one here, do loop until. Because we want the user to go ahead and input something into the input box. So we can do a do loop until. So we're going to type do, and then I'm going to go ahead and insert the ending statement here. Do, I'm going to come down and input the loop until, and then a condition. What's the condition? Well, my condition is that this product code should not be blank. So I'm going to do a not equals to. These carets together mean not equal to. So product code is not equal to blank. And this double quotes here with nothing in between. There's no space. There's no underscore. Just double quotes is a way to signify blank or empty string, right? There's nothing in between the quotes. So this says do this loop until product code is not blank. And what are we going to put inside this do loop? Well, this is where we're going to put our input box. So let me go scroll. Sorry about the scrolling. Let me come back to problem 6. Here it is. We're going to create an input box statement asking the user to input a product code. So let's do a product code equals. And this is where we're going to put our input box. Input a product code. And then we'll give it a title here, product code, as the title of the message or the input box. And let's see how we do. So I'm going to hit F8. We've started F8 again, F8, and F8. And there's our input box. Now, let's test. If I click OK, what happens? We should be presented back with the input box because the loop is going to execute again. If I click OK, there's nothing inputted, and it's going to force me to input again. And it's going to run this loop again. So I'm going to click OK. Actually, then I have to do F8, and it goes back. And then I have to do it again. If I click OK, and F8, and back again. So product code right now is empty. There's nothing in product code. So this is going to keep looping until I put something inside that input box. And it doesn't have to be string. It could be something else, right? I mean, I guess, it doesn't have to be anything understandable. It could be random letters. And once I hit OK, and then F8 again, it will exit that loop, right? Let's do this. Let's come down here and we'll do a debug.print. And what this is going to do is this will print our product code into the immediate window down here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit F5 at this point because it looks like it's running. It's asking us to input a product code. So we're down here. So it started the loop and it's asking us for the first time to put in an input box. If I hit cancel, let's test that. It should ask me again. Cancel, ask me again. Cancel, and OK. Still blank, OK. Still blank, OK. And then X, still blank, still blank, still blank. So I have to put something in here. Product 1. I'll click OK. And if that worked, yes, we should see product 1 in the immediate window here because this debug.print code prints the value of product code into the immediate window. So that is exercise 6. We've created a do loop, and we're saying we want you to do this until this condition is met, which is that product code is not an empty string. Okay, the last example here is going to be problem number 12. Number 12 in Chapter 7, at the end of Chapter 7, says, all passwords in your company system must be 8 characters long, start with an uppercase, and consist of uppercase letters and digits, no spaces. Employees are issued a password, but then they're allowed to change it to one of their own. Write a sub to get a user's new password. It should use an input box embedded with a do loop to get the password. The purpose of the loop is to check that they indeed enter a valid password. So let's start that. Let's create a sub, and we will name it password sub. Let's go ahead and declare password a variable password as string. And then I think maybe there's probably more than one way to do this. I'm going to go ahead and create a variable called password valid as Boolean, which means it's either going to be a true or false value. And then we're probably going to need a counter. So I'll go ahead and initiate that. And let's start there. So it wants us to do a do loop. Back to the do's. And kind of like we did what we did before, I'm going to create a do loop until. So I'm going to go do, and I'll go ahead and close it off. Do loop until. And when do we want to stop it? We're going to stop when the password valid is equal to true. Now remember, this is a Boolean value already, so I actually don't need this code right here. Because this is a Boolean, this is going to resolve to either true or false based on what I put inside of this loop. But it's probably helpful to add the true part here as well. That just makes it a little bit more clear in the code. So what are we going to do? The first thing I say, let's go ahead and create an input box where we're going to ask the user, please input a new password. And we'll go ahead and title it new password. And there's our input box. And then what we're going to do is we're going to check to see a couple things. First of all, we're going to check to see if the length of the password is equal to 8 and if the password is the same as an uppercase password, which means if we change all of these letters inside that password to be uppercase, and if that is the same as the actual password that was typed in, then we know that those two conditions have been met, right? But in addition to that, we're also going to check to see if all of the individual letters are uppercase as well. So this tests for okay, the last condition that we need to check for here is if there's a space inside the password. So we've checked to see if the password's 8 characters long. We've checked to see if the letters inside the password are uppercase. The last condition is to check to make sure that the password does not contain any spaces. So I think one way to do this, which may not be the most efficient, but that's okay. We'll do with what we know, what we have so far, is to create a test and see if each letter is a space. The first thing that I want to do here is I actually want to create a new variable. I want to copy the password to a new variable. So I'm going to declare, I'm going to go back up to my declare. I'm going to go ahead and just declare a new variable called check. It's going to be a string type. And in this line right here, I'm just going to copy the password into check. And then I'm going to do another do loop. And I'm going to say while the length of check is greater than 0, do the following and just loop through. So I've done a do while loop. And I'm going to run an if statement. If left check, comma 1 is equal to a space, then perform some code. Else, let's see, I'm missing a parentheses. Do something else, and then in the F. So why am I doing this? What I'm going to do is I'm going to shrink this check string by 1, which is this left function here. I'm going to take the most character of the check string, the first character on the left, and I'm going to check to see if that's a space. If it is a space, then what I want to do is I want to say password valid is false. Because if it has a space, it's not going to work. And I want to exit the do. So I'm going to exit this do statement. But else, if it's not a space, right? So I'm checking here to see if that character on the left is a space. If it is, then I'm going to say that it's an invalid password, and I want to exit this do loop, and I want to send it back to the input box. If that's not the case, that means that this is not a space, and that means that the password is valid. So password valid equals true. And the next thing I want to do is I want to shrink that check. and I want to shrink it by 1 character length. So I'm going to use the right function here. I'm going to take out that first letter, and I'm going to be left with everything else, right? So I have the length of that password minus 1, which for the first time it runs, it's going to be 8 minus 7 because it's supposed to be 8 long. In fact, it's only going to get down here if it is 8. If it's not 8, it's going to turn the user to a new input box. So if we get down here, we know that it's 8 already. We've already checked that. And now we're saying, just give me the right 7 characters of this variable, because we need to check those other 7, right? So we're shrinking down this password one by one, and then it's going to go back to the do. At least that's what we want it to. Let's see, we're done with the end if. Let me shrink this down. And then it's going to loop back. Yeah, so it's going to loop back to this do right here until it goes through every letter and make sure that there's no spaces. If there is a space in any of those characters, any of the 8 characters, it's going to exit the do with password valid equals false. And then it's going to loop back to the input box because this condition will not be met. But if each of these characters are not a space, then it will create the password valid equals true, and it will exit the do loop and then exit this loop, and we will have found a valid password. So let's try this. Click inside the sub. I'll click on F8, F8, F8. Here's the input box. And I have to be a little bit careful here. There's 3 things I need to do. It needs to be 8 characters long. It needs to be uppercase letters and no spaces. So let's do PASSWORD. That's 8 long and it's all uppercase and no spaces. So if I click OK, we can see here that it worked. Let's check to make sure it worked. Here's our password down here. Password is password. I'll click F8 again, and then it passes. So because we're down here, this uppercase has been the same as the password. So all the letters are uppercase, and the password's 8 characters long. So now we're going to copy password into the check variable, and we're going to check each character to see if there's any spaces. If the first character of password, which is going to be the capital P, is a space, then it's not valid. We'll click F8, and that's not true. So it skips down here. It's going to assign that password is valid, but it's still going to check. So now we're resizing check here. We'll click F8 again, and notice check is without the P. And now we'll continue on because that's kind of a bad word. And we'll check the next letter. And notice we are shrinking the letters. It's checking each letter in the word. And we're down to the last letter. We're going to loop one more time. It's going to do it one more time because the length of check is still greater than 1. So we're checking the last character. If it's a space, then we're going to exit. But no, it's not a space. We'll do password valid true. We'll shrink the check down to 0. We're going to loop back to the do. And now what is it? It's going to check before it runs again. Check is the length is 0. So it's going to skip and exit this loop. It's going to take us down to the end F. And we know that password valid is true, so it's going to get out of this loop as well after we click F8. And it will be done with the sub. Let me come down here and I'll add one more step, a debug.print. And we'll just print the password into our immediate window here so we have some kind of visible indication that it works. So I can click F8 and F8 again, and there's the password. and F8 to end the sub.